Hello, everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes. It's just before noon right now. So thank you for signing in. So I believe we have a poll that's live right now, just capturing who is in attendance, what type of entity you represent. If you fill that in, that's helpful. And if it's not live, please let me know. Once the pace of people entering slows down a little bit, we'll get started. Still adding quite a few people as we go. And if you're able to see and vote in the poll, that just kind of gives us an idea of who's attending, what type of agency you represent. That's great. Right now, it looks like only a few people have voted. That might be a function of using the Google Meets platform or not. It's a standard thing. All right, we've slowed down the pace of people entering the meeting, so I think it's safe to begin. Thanks everybody for logging in today. This is our second office hours. Probably should have changed this title here from Small Pond Office Hours to General Dam Safety and Small Pond. But we'll happily cover some topics that span both of them as we go. My name is John Roach. I'm the Chief of the Dam Safety Permitting Division here at MDE, and our division is probably the primary responsibility within our overall program is dealing with permitting, but also dealing with a lot of the small pond and policy issues that come up as well. Bill, I saw your note in the chat, and thank you for directing people to how to find that poll. So the intent of these small pond office hours is to kind of be a open and free exchange of information. This is our second one we've done. We had one in December of 2022. Looks like we've already almost doubled the amount of attendees. So hopefully you find these productive. And the intent is we'll keep on having them on a quarterly basis, until people agree that they're not worth it anymore. Of course, this doesn't replace the opportunity and ability for folks to reach out to us at any other time, via email, phone call, or a web meeting like this to get insight or help. The goal here is to share the information that's happening, with small ponds. There's a lot of changes happening. There's some changes that will be in the works in dams as well. So we want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of what's going on. If you need to sign off early, or if you find this valuable and want to share it with a colleague or a friend afterwards, this meeting is being recorded, and we will post it online once we complete it. So you'll have an opportunity to see it as well. And again, as I mentioned, the objective is really, is that promoting consistency across the state. We want to get feedback and improve our policies and processes, so we can serve a lot of you all better, and then get some insight into changes and improvements that the programs are seeing. Looks like about half the folks have voted in the poll, and I'll close it in about a minute or so. Good to see you here. So we've got fair number, just a little bit under half of the folks who are here represent consulting engineers or scientists, and then kind of an equal split between dam owners, state and local agencies as well. So it's great. So the idea behind these office hours is to, again, have free and open exchange of information. Depending on how crazy it gets, I'll say, we could have a lot of people talking over each other. So if we can get into the habit of using the raise hand option that's down at the lower part of your screen in Google Meets, that might help keep things a little orderly. But please feel free to jump in and ask questions or put 2 cents in at any time. Please, to the extent possible, we do want to try to respect, I think, everybody's time and the intent of this meeting. So if we get questions that are too project specific, down in the weeds, particularly where we might need to understand more of the big picture design stuff, that's probably handled better in a separate forum. But we do want to hear your ideas for how we can improve our program, the state administration of small ponds and dams, regulations, policies, etc. So we do appreciate the open communication. And we're all adults, and we know this, but we can disagree without being disagreeable. If things come up and we can't reach a consensus, we'll try to get there. So I'll just have a few slides here to talk about some announcements and then some questions that were submitted early. And then what we do is we kind of open the floor for a dialogue. Let's see, I'm going to end that poll here. So I think that will come up and you'll be able to see the range of people who are out in attendance today. So in terms of announcements, here's some big news for folks. It's big news, but it's has some things that require clarification. So the Maryland NRCS is in the final stages of developing a new Pond Code 378. Now, what does that mean for everybody? The important thing to note is that the 2000 version that we're all familiar with is still what's cited specifically in our regulations. And that still will control until such time we make a regulatory update or make announcements to that effect. So you'll see this new MD378 starting to come out. We worked with the NRCS. We provided lots of comments. I know they've also reached out to some of their stakeholders as well. So the new version largely does not have any conflicting information with the 2000 version. That being said, it may have some new things. That's in particular to filter diaphragms and anti-seep collars. It also removes some information that was previously there. And that will be replaced with MDE policies and procedures. I'd really like to encourage folks to use our MDE dam safety webpage to look at our policies documents and adopt those as kind of your first go-to when it comes to design questions, because those are what we're looking for people to follow. We're expecting people to follow those policies, and to date they've largely been clarifying policies to fill in existing gaps in 378 or misunderstandings. But with this new version that's starting to come out there, there'll be some additional ones that we have to create just because of what the new one does not cover. I think inevitably we'll get the question, so when will this new 2023 MD378 have the full effect of regulations? And I don't have an answer for that. We will be taking it under consideration, and we will be thinking about how we want to do a regulatory update and design guidance update as well. So it will be out there, but it's important to know that the 2000 version is still the controlling policy. For dam owners and consultants, I want to remind folks that the FEMA High Hazard Potential Dam Grant Program, we're expecting the notice of funding opportunity next month. There's a limited subset of dams in Maryland that really qualify for this. They have to be in poor condition or unsafe. They have to be high hazard, and there's a couple other criteria that need to follow. But if you are interested and your dam might qualify, please reach out to us, because we coordinate that application statewide with MDEM, and but it will help to know the pool of interested parties that might want to apply for their dam to get some funding through that FEMA High Hazard Potential Dam Program. Speaking of the policies I mentioned earlier, there are some new policies that we've reviewed with our stakeholder groups that are about to hit our website, and I'll just touch on what those are right now. Some of them are policies that are, I think, fairly obvious to most folks and wouldn't cause much of a change. It's just something that needed to be put out there to make sure we're all clear and on the same page. The first one I'll note here is policies about in-kind replacement. And what that really means is that, particularly when it comes to a spillway replacement, you do need small pond or dam approvals to do an in-kind replacement, and in-kind may not necessarily be acceptable. You know, you have to evaluate the current conditions, both hydrology and hydraulics, land use, hazard classification, and understand it in rainfall, for that matter. I guess that comes into the hydrology, to make sure that it is adequate to the current standards. So particularly these days with, you know, changing climate and increased focus on resiliency, we really can't say that we're focused on resiliency and building more resilient Maryland and then put back in the ground something that might have been designed 30 years ago based on data that was 50 years old, right? I think we can all accept that. The next policy talks about ponds that connect directly to a storm drain system. So instead of discharging to an open channel, they discharge to a storm drain system. And really what we talk about in that one is considerations, how you have to consider tailwater effects and all of that storm drain network. So that seems to be a problem that we've been seeing a lot more lately, this type of structure, and felt it was important to get some information out there to set, again, some expectations on what, how we should consider these factors that really control the spillway design. Next, we've got a policy that clarifies our excavated pond criteria. You know, 378 has an exemption, so you don't need a small pond approval for excavated ponds. But what people have evolved the definition of excavated ponds to is very broad, certainly beyond the original scope of an excavated pond process, where the notion was that this is really, you know, a watering ramp for livestock or things like that. So we're just clarifying what can meet excavated pond criteria, largely based on the existing 10H plus 20 projection criteria. I think you'll see some good stuff in there that makes your designs a little easier, and even some relaxation of a little bit of criteria to make to meet the current, you know, state of the practice. Although through the A-Storm initiative and other federal work, we recognize that there is a new rainfall data set that will be coming in the next few years. Another new policy coming out is a reiteration of one that's been out actually for well over a decade, is just making sure that the design of these ponds uses the Atlas 14 rainfall depth and distributions. It's come to our understanding that in some areas, the stormwater design is still refers to TP40 rainfall depths and distributions. And while that may be acceptable in some cases for stormwater, for the pond structural design itself, Atlas 14, it's been out for a long time. It should be being used by everybody, but we just want to, again, make that clear. We don't want to use very old data to design these ponds. The last one that's about to come out discusses the repair of, what I'll call it, the repair of known deficiencies. And the notion of this policy is, again, reiterating what we've kind of always had as a written policy, but if you're going to go in and fix something on the pond, you need to fix everything on the pond, is the short way to say that one, right? If you know you have, let's say, a spillway trash rack that needs replacement, but also it's a corrugated metal pipe that's completely rusted out the invert, you really need to do both of those. You can't just put the trash rack in and ignore the larger problem. The next two policies that you'll see in red on this list are coming from the discussion that I had earlier about the updating of MD378. So in the newer version of MD378, you will see that the criteria for what does not need small pond approval is not in that document. When it was released publicly, that was left out. I think NRCS, I agree with them that that's really more of a state policy than their policy. So we will be basically replacing what's there and making it a policy, so that way there's no gap. So the embankments under 4 feet high and things like that will still be able to be exempt from having small pond approvals. The second one that's out in there in red is filter diaphragms and anti-seep collars. Now for dams, be they low hazard or high hazard, it's still our policy that filter diaphragms are required for spillways. But for ponds, it has been the practice for many years to still accept anti-seep collars. The new Pond Code 378, building off the national NRCS standard, I think has a really good section that discusses seepage control and when filter diaphragms are required, even for small ponds, versus anti-seep collars being able to be employed. So we are really going to copy and paste that from the 378 new version into a policy so that we cover that gap again because the new version won't be in regulation, but our policies have the force of regulation. We're going to be moving in that direction. So clarify when filter diaphragms are acceptable versus when anti-seep colors may be used. There's a whole host of other ideas that we have about policies and design aids and things like that. And, we're getting to a point now where we have a lot of these out there, and we probably need to start combining them into a larger design document, and taking each one of these separate policies and building it into as a chapter or section of a new design criteria. So will we continue to release more policies? I think as we've approached this in the past, it's kind of a stopgap measure to help address project or specific questions or trends that we're seeing. But I'd like to move towards the mode of looking at a bigger, more holistic document than individual policies. All right, the last announcement I wanted to make here is just for clarification. So in our last small pond meeting, or our last open house like this, we talked about the new policies and procedures for small pond approvals that went into effect January 1st of this year. And what that asks is that the soil conservation district have either a PE on staff, or that they have a PE available to them to perform technical reviews, whether that be a third-party agreement with a consulting firm, a sole proprietor, or if they have an agreement with a county or another county agency like a stormwater review agency who can provide those services as well. And my list that I kind of keep on my notepad on my computer is copied here below. I think it's complete. If I'm incorrect, hopefully people who are doing small pond approvals can correct me. But this list here represents the districts which are currently reviewing and approving small ponds. All the other districts out there would still need to come through MDE to obtain those small pond approvals until such time that district comes back online. Okay. That's the announcements. Maybe we take a break here and stop for a second to see if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask or comments. Open the floor there. Yeah, Navring. Hello.
Hey, good afternoon, John.
Hi.
The question I have in the draft checklist, we have a one item called seepage determination. And I have received number of on a project the question from the designer, what does it mean and what we expect for that from the geotech engineer. Can you please help me out?
Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer on that one. I'd have to look into exactly how it's written and worded. I think for small ponds, we're not generally looking for like a full-blown seepage analysis. I think it really would be if you're addressing a known seepage issue. We would look for that kind of, if we're going to address a known seepage issue, we kind of have to have something better than a guess to fix it, right? So, but if it's a new construction or there's not really an existing seepage issue, and we have proper impervious cores and whatnot, then I don't think we're going to ask people to do seepage analysis just for the sake of it, to check a box. Hopefully that helps answer that question. And I will say that the design review checklist that's a draft on our webpage is something that myself and our dam safety permitting team have been workshopping internally and trying to take it from draft to more complete, because there's some things in there that don't make sense and some things that are duplicated and some things that weren't put in there in the first place. So right now, I would say use that with the recognition that it is draft, and that some things may be non-applicable to certain projects. It's just out there as a guide to make sure that we're all hopefully looking about and thinking about the same types of things in our design and review efforts.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Bob, yes.
Hey, John, thanks. Yeah. After all these years, I still haven't become familiar with it, but I'm getting in tune with this EPA SWIM software.
Yeah.
And I know that Pennsylvania has, in their draft manual, adopted it because of its ability to do continuous simulation. And my question is, obviously, we've always leveraged extensively the use of TR20 for routing. Is there an option or a thought to use EPA SWIM because of its good hydraulic modeling capacity, particularly as it relates to connectivity to storm drains?
Well, I will admit that my background is geotechnical, so I'm not very familiar with the SWIM software. I think it is important to note, and since it's EPA, I believe this to be true, that the regulations in the state generally require that the software used for design is quote unquote open source or freely available. That's important so that the reviewers can access it as well as the designers and see the work. I think the question for storm drain ponds it's going to be a little bit of double-sided. So I can't really speak to the stormwater review aspects of it and whether or not SWIM modeling is appropriate there. I think for the dam safety aspects, it might be appropriate to use there, but I think there has to be a level of comfort with the reviewers that they know how to use the software as well. So I wouldn't want to swing open the door wildly and say that everybody should start using that. I think it's something that you'd probably want to work with the jurisdiction who's reviewing it to make sure that they're comfortable and that they understand, the assumptions and everything that you built in to your modeling.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Martin. Good morning. Good afternoon.
John, we're having an open discussion here, so I want to talk about what Bob just asked you.
Okay.
Hi, Bob. Haven't seen you in a while. We had a real problem when I first got here. That's been a long time ago now, with a local guy who had written his own program, and he was working for the largest developer locally, and his program would give him any answer he wanted.
That's always helpful for
It
him.
was terrible. It was a terrible experience. It took years to get it straightened out. The only way I got it straightened out was by insisting that people will use either TR20 or TR55 for everything, because it states right in the manual that it has to be. That's what it's all based on. If you start allowing other programs, you need to put a list out of what they are and be very careful what you allow, because then how do I stop somebody who writes their own program to give themselves whatever answers they want?
I think that's a very fair point, and that's where, and I probably should clarify the way our regulations they're outdated, so they're still referring to some software that's well out there. But I guess when I said open source, I kind of probably should have clarified it even more, because I guess you could write your own software and make it free, right? That these are kind of generally supported by federal agencies, right? So it's whether it's NRCS with TR20, TR55, whether it's Army Corps with the HMS, HEC-RAS products. I think that's what we look to accept, and I would think a lot of the other jurisdictions would feel the same way. Is that once we start getting into real proprietary or boutique software, while it can be valuable to model complex situations, you also get the potential issue of black box, right, and garbage in, garbage out. And if we don't know the software or we don't even own it to open it up, then how can we know if it's garbage in, garbage out? It would need to at least be somehow ground truth and checkable with one of those federal software pieces, and you'd have to get somewhat matching results, I think, if you were to accept non-standard software, let's call it that. I saw Greg Adolph had his hand raised, but maybe it's been lowered. I'm not sure. I'm trying to look at the list. And if not, I saw Mark Etheridge had his hand raised as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Hey, Martin, good to see you. We had the same issue as Martin had when these proprietary practices started coming out, these software packages, and we were asking for guidance, and it's very difficult because not only does if you're not going to use TR55, not only does some agency have to look at this package and say, yeah, this does what we want to do, but they have to keep looking at it with every version of the package that gets issued. That's not really tenable. So what we did the same thing. You can use whatever you want in your office to do your design, but in the end of the day, you're going to put it in TR55 and submit it to us so that we have something that's approvable and we're familiar with. I share everything that Martin said about those packages. Just want to throw that in. Thanks.
Thanks. I think next up we got Gunwant. Is his hand raised?
Hi, John. Good afternoon.
Hi,
So John, we have observed some little lack of clarity on when we do a dam breach and a 2D model is used, for example, a HEC-RAS 2D model. There is some confusion about what exactly needs to be included in the report. We have seen people including the entire model, but nothing else, just an inundation map in the report. Some we have asked to give some inputs data which went into that, and they have printed out some screenshots of that. But in general, we have observed that there is some not standardization of what exactly should be at a minimum included from the 2D model. And that is something, if in future, if you get a chance to take a stab on this one, maybe that is some clarity would be greatly appreciated on that end.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. We could definitely work on something like that. We do ourselves often ask for and receive the whole model itself, even though that can be majorly huge size. But I would also expect in a report that there's some discussion of the data sources that were used. And if you're breaching it in the software, what the breach information is as well. So thank you for that comment. Yeah, we'll put that on the to-do list, is to make a kind of a minimum things we need to see submitted to help us check a 2D model.
Thank you.
Yep. Right now, I see Greg Adolph, you've got your hand raised, and then Phil Jones.
Yes, thanks, John. Apologies if the connection's not great. I'm actually kind of on the road right now, but wanted to ask a question relative to the embankment classification kind of flow chart. I think there was a draft recently released by, or kind of put out there by MDE, and I'm wondering, I haven't been on your page in a couple weeks, but whether that's posted, because I found it very helpful for classifying small ponds, and that particularly with respect to the excavated pond that you mentioned earlier. So that's kind of part one question. The other one was relative to sand filter diaphragms, and we've traditionally used the NRCS Chapter 45 gradation to establish gradations. I just wonder, is there a FEMA document that supports that? Or basically, we always end up using C33 concrete sand. And yet, there's always a mandate to kind of justify that in some computations. And I'm just wondering maybe if there's a different clarification of kind of how that is. So I'll turn it back to you and mute myself, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those two questions. So the flow charts, yeah, I don't have that posted on my site. Amanda Malcolm in our peer group and the plan review group really spearheaded the development of that flow chart, and I will admit I'm eating crow a little bit, because when she first started doing that, I thought it wasn't necessary. But clearly it is wanted and desired and needed from the community. So I think she put a draft out there. She had revised it a couple of times. I think now that once this excavated pond policy hits the website and it's kind of official, then that was, I think, the final puzzle piece, I guess, that she needed to finalize that flow chart. And I think we'll both have it on both of our pages once that's finished, because yeah, it really has proven itself to be valuable to a lot of folks. In terms of filter diaphragm design, FEMA does not have a documentation on it. The Army Corps does for filter diaphragm design, and potentially Bureau Reclamation does as well. They might just call to NRCS or the Corps. I do forget on that one. I think that's something we'll look at as we put together the policy on this, because the new 378, does say look at the NRCS chapters 26 and 45 for both the geometry and the gradation. I think we've developed, at least internally in my division, a little comfort level that for small ponds, typically, doing the full check of the gradation and things like that is probably not necessarily just default to C33, whereas for a dam.
Yeah, I guess thank you for that,
everything.
because that's more in the context of what I'm thinking with this conversation in small ponds. So we'll continue to work with you and reach out as questions arise, but that suffices. Thank you so much.
Great. Yep. Let's see, the last hand we've got raised right now, although I've seen some raised and lower, so you're still welcome to do that. But I see Phil Jones is still up there.
Hey, John. I have an easy question and a harder question. So,
All right.
Could you let us know exactly when you're thinking the excavated pond criteria would be up on the website? Plus or minus a few weeks.
I think, well, if I remember correctly, we kind of had like a final draft, and then we sent it out one last final draft, to see that the people who made comments received it, I guess, correctly, or their comments were ingested correctly to the document. So I think I asked folks to send me their, final draft, any last, speak now, forever hold your peace type comments by the end of the day today. It might have been the end of the day yesterday. So that means that, in the next week or two, we'll probably just, clean it up and again, address any of those really lingering questions and then post it. So in a month's time, it should be there.
That sounds great. Okay, the big question is, with some of the, well, not some, all of the small pond approvals that we've been receiving from your office recently, here in Montgomery County, the owner operation and maintenance plan guidelines seem to differ in some respects from our established practices in terms of inspection. We're set up to do triennial inspections, and some of the language in there seems to be kind of possibly borrowed from significant or high hazard dam language in terms of annual inspections or inspections after, particularly severe events. And, we agree in principle with all of that. But that's, to be blunt, not how our contracts are set up. And most of the things that fall to the quote unquote owner in this document actually fall to us at DEP by virtue of the, easements and covenants. We wouldn't want the owner, the actual landowner, to be inspecting the conduits or exercising the valves.
Sure.
But at the same time, again, that's not something that we are currently, set up to do with our contracts, as I understand it.
Yeah. So, and this is just so I'm making sure I'm answering correctly. This is like the at the end of the small pond approval, like all the check, there's a series of check boxes and things that it really is kind of like the O&M template that's in there. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's kind of the appendix, the last couple pages for the approval document, which, the owner, we assume it's, when they say accepted by owner, that means the actual landowner, even though the responsibilities would mostly transfer to us.
Right. So I guess I would say the origin of that is actually, I believe, if I remember correctly, Prince George's FCD, and I think St. Mary's used it as well. But that being said, it is a how to say it, that's not a mandatory, you must use that. It's yeah, so if you have an O&M guidance basically that you are following, that's great. That's in there and added as kind of an appendix for when none exists, right? So you can use that to kind of build one. I believe the intent of how it was like, instead of having a permit condition that says whether you means a county DEP or Joe Smith landowner need to come up with a whole O&M plan. It's here's we're giving you kind of a O&M in a box, and you can use that if you don't have anything else. So hopefully that kind of sheds a little more light on the intent of it, and that way you don't have to feel strictly beholden to that. You can be more rigorous, less rigorous, if you have an existing plan that works.
Okay.
That should work unless your existing O&M plan says look at it once every 50 years and ignore it otherwise, then and I don't think it says that. So
Okay, well, that's helpful and reassuring. I mean, it's good to have a comprehensive list, and with some of the larger HOAs that we deal with that have dedicated maintenance staff, we can say, hey, after a big event, please get some eyes on this. But that would be, as we see it, handled sort of a bit more informally than what's implied by the checklist or the guidelines.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, so now, I mean, we've already opened the floor to questions and discussion, and that's great. That's why we're here. I do have a couple slides here because I did get some questions ahead of time, and I figured I'd just write out some responses to help them. We already touched on this when I mentioned the in-kind policy. I guess that's kind of well timed for this one question we had about do we need to get small pond approval for that? And I think at the heart of it, I go back to the law, and it's I'm paraphrasing here, but it's any person who wishes to construct, reconstruct, modify, or repair a dam. And maintenance, we generally all agree doesn't require permitting, but I think putting in an entire new spillway, even if it was the same as what's there, is beyond maintenance, right? That it really is rises to the level of needing permitting or approval. So yes, we are looking for to kind of make sure that everybody is clear and aware that spillway replacements shouldn't just be rubber stamped as what's there now is good. It may not be good. It may not have been good in the first place. And just kind of, you can see what I've written here, but we've got evolving rainfall data. In some cases, I've seen people request in-kind replacement of a spillway, and they don't even have any original design or as-built information. So how do we know it's adequate? And then we have to realize that, particularly in more developing areas, what was once a low hazard may not be a low hazard structure anymore, due to upstream and downstream development. So hopefully that kind of answers that question. And if you're the individual who sent it in and I haven't gotten it for you, then please let me know. There's another question and conversation that we've been having with a couple different folks about the whole new small pond approval process. So got just a little bit of stuff to clarify here on that. So again, so we're on the same page. And for most of these, really, I do recognize seeing some of the names on the screen. When I say SCD or NRCS or SCD, if you're a state and federal applicant and you come direct to MDE, this just use those words interchangeably. But we have had the question about this new technical review affidavit, the notion that, again, if you're a outside party doing the technical review on the behalf of the SCD. We've asked that you sign this thing that says, hey, I did the review and I looked at, what the applicable standards are, and I'd say it meets those. But that being said, I want to clarify again here that that if you are a SCD or NRCS staff with job approval authority to do small pond reviews, then you do not need to do that. This is really, again, for people who are you've hired to do the reviews, or you have an MOU to do the reviews. They're outside of your that umbrella of your agency and the job approval authority. Likewise, if you're a staff member of one of our designees, at this time that's State Highway, or your MDE staff member, where you don't need to do the technical review affidavit as well. And that's really just, it's how many degrees of separation do we have from that reviewer, I guess, is kind of, how we looked at that. Clarifying here that, the approval itself has to come from the SCD, our designee, State Highway or MDE. And we do want to see people use that small pond approval template. I totally expect reasonable tweaks, but hopefully we're using that. That's trying to generate consistency in expectations, for contractors and owners. We discussed the maintenance side of that though a couple minutes ago. Now I do want also kind of I'll say this, I've said this before in other forums, but a little clarification on small pond approvals through MDE. So if MDE small pond approval is needed, and again, this is from dam safety. This is not for state and federal applicants. Our plan review division has a process that's separate and different. State and federal applicants for small pond review, stormwater, erosion sediment control. That has not changed. We're not part of that. But if you're coming to dam safety for a small pond approval, because let's say you're in Cecil County and Cecil SCD is not doing them, the application is the joint permit application. That's how we get our application information in. So even if there are no wetlands or waterways impacts, or impacts to waters of the state, that's the application. We also have an Appendix B that's up on if you go to the JPA website and our website, we have a link to those. The Appendix B also basically is kind of like a modified small pond summary sheet. So it's giving us the context of what you're applying for. How big is this structure? What kind of breach analysis did you do and stuff like that. And it also has a list of the documentation that we need for review. So we oftentimes get joint permit applications in just with the wetlands and impact plates, and trying to fix the processes that it takes a long time to get from the day it hits the door at MDE to when it gets to our staff to start review. And if we don't have the documentation we need for that review, then it's even longer. I'm trying to encourage people to send that kind of information in with the application so that we can reduce any of those delays to the extent we have control over. I also want to note that when a JPA comes in for a project, what happens is that there's a screening office outside of our program that looks at the application and figures out who needs to look at it. And I will note that basically anytime there's stormwater management, it's kind of a keyword. I'll be honest, a little bit of how they decide where things go is a little bit of a uncertain to me, but I do believe they look at, the keywords and the project descriptions, maybe open up the plans a little bit. But if there's stormwater ponds on your project, it's going to come to dam safety as well. That's their process. So again, in terms of, making sure we adjust workloads and avoid delays and all that stuff, I do want to kind of remind everybody that that is what happens. And once we get an application, we need to take some action on it. We need to, bring it to the end of a process. Whether that means we issue a small pond approval, whether it means we say that this meets 378 criteria and a SCD can review it, or maybe we determine that there's no permit needed, it's a 2-foot tall micro bioretention. So I do want to encourage folks, again, to provide, your supporting materials in your application packages. Even if you're not seeking dam safety small pond approval, this will help us close out the application quicker and get you a letter that says you looked at it and you're done on our end. That helps our staff move things quicker and avoid bigger backlogs, and it will help you too. I also will say to that end, if the information is not in the application package, you've probably seen this. Well, our staff will reach out to the applicant or the engineer to get what is needed. We may also reach out if we know a district is, if we've got good contacts with folks, we may look to the SCD or technical reviewer. Perhaps they've already looked at it. Perhaps it's already gotten small pond approval. And if we can determine that, then we can, again, close out our actions and move that one off of our plate. So that's a little note about permitting and small pond reviews. I see a hand raised.
John, I assume you're referring to me. It's Bob
Yes,
again.
sorry, Bob. Yep. I should have said.
So I had to pull a dam permit or pond permit last year or year before. I can't remember. Time flies. But anyway, one of the things that came out of it was the need for effectively a covenant with MDE. This was a pond that was in Baltimore County, and many of the counties do also require them to be in easements and have a deed of easement and maintenance obligations in that agreement. So it seemed like there was I'll call it a duplication or redundancy. And I asked about whether there was, in those jurisdictions that had those kind of things in place, whether there was a need for both because of the redundancy. So is there any thought that we wouldn't have that scenario, or that you're going to continue to have two things aimed at doing the same thing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think you're referring to the memorandum of land restrictions. And we, we've only really started kind of moving to do small pond approvals in the past, let's say 2 years. We always kind of did just a dam safety permit. We realized that, we don't have to do that. So if it's a small pond approval that we're issuing, then that memorandum of land restrictions is not required. We're going to lean on language here and say because it's an approval and not a permit. But that being said, the state law actually does require us to seek that memorandum of land restrictions when we issue a permit. So we can't, there's no options to not do it, I guess. They do serve slightly different purposes, and and because of who is issuing that covenant or land restriction, be it the county or the state. But hopefully that's the quick and easy. If it's small pond, that won't be required. If it's a dam, unless and until the law changes, we will have to seek that out. And we see benefits in having it. Particularly just for having that on the land records and making a potential dam owner aware, if you're buying a property, that you have, obligations that you may not realize you have before you complete that purchase through a title. You should come up on a title search and stuff like that. So that's what we have for that. All right, I am going to put some folks on the spot right now, because some people have gotten some questions that kind of allude to, rainfall, where things are going. I see Stu Comstock's on here, and I don't have him, I don't have anything to report, but Stu and his team have been leading the ACE Storm effort, which, as you're aware, is advancing stormwater resiliency in Maryland. It's got, a pretty broad directive to look at, what do we need to be doing in terms of resiliency and reducing flooding and all of that. At this time, I don't have any new information to share on that. So if folks have questions, Stu might be able to answer those, or he might have to point you to, it's something still being investigated, and there'll be more messaging later. I am, though, going to turn it over to Scott Bass a little, if he doesn't mind, to just give a very brief update on the status of our state-specific PMP study, because we did have some questions come in about should we be using that, or can we be using that now? And I think, Scott, you can shine a little more light on the status and some of those big picture questions that we are hoping to resolve soon, but that will change the final numbers that come out of the modeling.
Sure, I can touch on it briefly. And for those, maybe a large portion of the group here today isn't, even maybe familiar with PMF because they're interested in small ponds or whatever. But as John said, and some of you may know, we have the state-specific probable maximum precipitation study underway. It's pretty far along. We haven't secured funding to finalize it, so I don't want to give a time frame on when Maryland's delivery of the product to engineers and the public at large will be. But as John said and mentioned, there are some questions of whether it's appropriate to be using this now. I don't have a great answer for you, but I could give maybe some guidance to dam owners, just because the problem with dams not passing PMF is big in the state. However, I will say some dams don't pass it. Maybe they pass 95% of the PMF, whereas another dam through hazard creep or whatever only passes 20% of the PMF. And I would say, in the case, if your dam only passes 20% of the PMF and you're looking to upgrade it now, you may not want to wait for the new numbers to design an upgrade of your dam, because the new numbers will likely result in lesser inflows to your dam. So you're going to be over designing, but if you have a dam that only passes 20% of the PMF and you need to pass the PMF, you're putting yourself as a dam owner at great risk by not addressing the problem immediately. However, if your dam passes 95% of the PMF and you're looking to upgrade, I would say it would probably be reasonable to wait until we deliver the final product to use that. And if you're somewhere in between, it might be case by case, but I'm hesitant to give a thumbs up or thumbs down. I would like to put that on the engineer. Maybe you could, the dam owner and the dam owner's engineer could work with on a specific study, that kind of weighs these pros and cons, these benefits of doing it now with the HMR 51 numbers, or looking at the preliminary numbers that Maryland has put forth to a select group. So yeah, I know that's not the best answer, but it's just kind of complicated. And some of the things we're wrestling with now are the impact of the Smethport storm on the western part of the state, how far to extend, the assumptions that went into a new analysis of Smethport through the Pennsylvania PMP study, how far into western Maryland that extends. What's another one we're dealing with? Oh, also some of the final rainfall distributions that we'll be looking at and how that'll impact these final numbers. And it's a lot more complicated than the HMR, unfortunately. So it's hard to give specific guidance. And this is kind of new to us as well. So that's probably an unsatisfactory answer. It's kind of convoluted. But I guess I'll leave it there unless John wanted me to clarify anything in particular.
No, thank you, Scott. That's great. I'll just say, we're getting down. It's that last 10% is the hardest, right? I think, and the state PMP studies look at identifying which storms could occur in this region or have occurred, and then maximizing them, really pumping them up, and seeing what would happen. And that's complete, but it's these really kind of complex meteorological questions right now. Like Scott said, about how far east of the Continental Divide does Smethport have an influence, and should you kind of look at all of the tropical storms and develop an average rainfall distribution curve, or use a synthetic curve, or if you know a certain storm controls, should you use that specific storm, specific rainfall distribution? That's what we're seeking advice from right now, and hopefully we can get some good intelligent advice. But it's beyond dam safety, hydrology, and hydraulics world. It really is a meteorological question nowadays. So that's the end. That's the last big lifts, I think, before we can really comfortably say yes, use the study and feel confident with it. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions about rainfall. Hi, Greg Adolph. Yes.
Yeah, hi, John. I guess I'd be kind of missed, maybe a bit self-promoting on this, but we just finished up our hobby collection on a high hazard dam called HydroTurf. I know dam safety is just inspector. I guess I just wanted to throw it into the spaces in consideration of we don't have capacity, spillway capacity to pass a PMF event. There's now at least some statewide precedent for an option to address that. So there's more to come, I guess. Perhaps finished with the project just yet, but it's installed. It's in Columbia off of Stoughton River called Gerwig Lane. And I'd be happy to share that with anybody who would be interested in learning a bit more.
Thanks for that, and thanks for the offer for sharing. That's it's in a perfect world, let's say, fully handling PMF level flows in a spillway is desirable, but that's not always the possible. And yes, the Gerwig Lane project, did what you could through the spillway, and then recognized that there might have to be some overtopping for the extreme events, and you need to armor the embankment for that. So HydroTurf was used there. You've also seen other types of embankment hardening techniques to cover that. And perhaps that's some good thing to consider as we're in this kind of interim phase between existing HMR data versus state specific data, and where exactly we land for the projects. So, but more to come on that. Certainly more to come on the lesser storms. At the federal level, they're moving towards updating Atlas 14. People are referring to it as Atlas 15. I don't have an exact time frame for when that on the federal level is expected, but so within the next 5 years, I believe. And will that include climate change predictions or not? Will Maryland results of a storm include climate change predictions or modification factors? It's all possible. So stay tuned. It will be an interesting next few years. All right. I think I've captured a lot of the questions we had gotten ahead of time, hopefully the best to my ability. We're now about an hour in here. We've had some great dialogue, and as we did in our past open house session, if we have anybody has any lingering questions or comments, ideas, this is kind of the idea of having this open forum and information sharing. So I will be quiet, and we'll see if anybody wants to speak up, and if it's kind of gets slow and we start dropping off questions, then we will maybe end a little early and people can get out and enjoy the nice weather. So, and I see Bob has his hand raised.
I'm going to give a little compliment to Mark Etheridge. I know he was on the call. His jurisdiction has always been really good about showing like standards. And a lot of the reason, as it was explained to me, the standards were driven by things they know work, and they do a lot of their own maintenance. So they're getting feedback out of their maintenance crews. And for that matter, when they show up, they know what to do. And I know that Amanda Malcolm had issued some standards for profiles of microbial retentions, which I really think are awesome. And I would ask that anything, say for filter bridges or the diaphragms, that, you know, once we introduce the need to do those pretty much universally, that it should be vetted one time, you know, for establishing a filter bridge. And that should be just the standard, right? So that if there's ever a need for maintenance moving forward, we're not trying to figure out how it was designed in 1980 or 90 or 2023. We're just going out and doing the standard.
All right, thank you for that. That's a good idea. Gunwan.
So John, this is regarding your first slide. You said on the first slide that there are some upcoming policy memos, and there were a couple of them. One said excavated pond, and the other said storm drain pond. So I was thinking, because maybe a week back, Amanda's group, Amanda actually issued a draft version of a 4378 flowchart, and it did cover your excavated pond, but it did not cover the storm drain pond in it. So would there be any coordination or how would the storm drain pond be connected to the determination of whether it's a code 378 or it comes to dam safety or to whom? Because it seems like there would be a gap if that draft is issued without addressing the storm drain ponds memo, which is about to be released.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Trying not to create like a new category of pond, you know, whether it's an excavator, a chapter 3, or a micro practice. The storm drain pond document is really trying to clarify, I think, design expectations when you plug directly into a storm drain network. So it may qualify as an excavated pond and it discharges into a storm drain network, or it may already be a 378 pond and it discharges into a storm drain network. So I think it's not trying to create a new category per se. It's just trying to clarify the design expectations for if that's how your spillway system works. And hopefully that stays true, and when it's released, then you don't come back to me and say that I was incorrect. I've got a new type of pond, but that's the overall goal. It's not to create a new bin or a new piece of the flow chart. It's really design criteria.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, Dan Cross.
Stu, greetings. I'm on the call as a private sector developer. I'm going to start with thank yous. I've had the occasion to be in touch with you, and we're working with Kelly Flint for our project Cloverly in Smithsburg, Maryland. And we're now also working with Stu Comstack on our project in Thurmont, Maryland. I know my engineers, Joe Ceci and Gordon Poffenberger with Fox, are both on the call. I'm going to speak as the private sector developer about the relationship between time and money. In the case of our Cloverly project, we are now at the 1-year mark of seeking approval for our stormwater management facilities. So when I have to respond to investors and lenders about the timeline of our project, I begin to lose my ability to speak, as I am now. How do you answer these questions? Because the process has gotten very, very lengthy. You have the slide up right now about which SCDs are currently reviewing and excluding small ponds. And Certainly for both Washington County and Frederick, we're dependent upon one contract engineer, Roger, who is in and out of the office periodically as required. That's tough to forecast how you're going to get through the approval process. So though I appreciate the relationship, Stu, you've got a letter from me in the last 24 hours detailing the problem in Thermont, and the discussion about repair of known deficiencies is going to ring an incredible bell there. But if we can work on a little more of a pilot's level of checklist of time gates, both for us as the developer, for our civil engineers, but for you as the sovereigns, so that we can tell the investment community when we expect to bring housing to market, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I have seen in my career here that, you're absolutely right. Time is money. And when I count my, do some internal statistics, and I say, how long has it been till we issue a permit? What's our turnaround time? I view that turnaround time as, what's your turnaround time, right? So I report from the day it hits MDE till you get something in hand. Not, there's ways to make it look, I guess the numbers look better for me, right? But that's not what the public sees. So at least on our side in dam safety, we're trying to do what we can do to, put out more of these guidances, checklists, things like that, create standard expectations, and hopefully that can be smoothed out. Staffing is, and I can only speak for, us and state, but staffing is always, the X factor that we don't have control over. So we will, but there's other people who do control that. So if you have a voice and who has controls, then we can appreciate that support to help get the messaging out that at the end of the day, if it comes down to just there's only 24 hours in a day, and we can't expect people to work for the full 24 hours as well, then we appreciate that. But we're trying to, again, I will say, 8 years ago when I joined this system to now, the refinements we've made and trying to streamline our, how we do the permitting stuff, times have dropped, I think, pretty precipitously. But I recognize that, going from 2 years to 6 months is great for us, but when you need it in 3 months, 6 months is double the time. So we hear that loud.
Again, I and my engineers look forward to continuing to work with you on both projects, and I thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks. Charlie.
Yeah, I want to interject in there too. It's not just the private development community. State and federal projects also are facing that same hurdle. It seems like H&H is done kind of towards the end in some ways, and it's always been a challenge. A lot of these state and federal agencies can't award a project until they get whatever approvals are needed from MDE, and that's how consultant reviewing and different things like that have come to pass to try to expedite it. But we share your concern. It is a real struggle to try to get everything worked out, because since H&H is last, a lot of times we're left sort of with what's left over as far as the prime land to do stormwater management or whatever it is you need to do, where you got to put a dam. And so there's a lot of challenges, but just wanted to acknowledge that. And it's not just a recent problem, it's been ongoing.
Thanks, Charlie. Bill Lashby.
Yeah, I hesitate to speak here, but I will. I mean, because fortunately, John brought me on board, and some of the folks online know that I came from a private sector background and understand a lot of the time challenges that developers have. But it's very refreshing to see that there's approximately 80 people online today listening to the challenges that are going on, asking the right questions and so forth. Because one of the challenges we have now as reviewers, John's brought me on as a senior reviewer here 2 years ago. One of the challenges we receive is the input from the engineers and developers. They'll send in, as part of that JPA that John was talking about before, sometimes they'll send in just enough information for us to get it on our list, but it's not entirely reviewable. I had that same challenge when I was in private sector and had my own practice, is making sure that the reviewers get plenty of adequate information so that they can do a thorough and timely review. So again, I'm so happy to see all of these folks on board, because we get good packages that come in. While we do have some changes that are happening, keep asking the questions of us is, how do those changes impact the permit application? But the better the application, the better, quicker, more efficient the review process is.
Absolutely. As I put this slide up, I'm realizing there's one kind of bigger picture announcement that is not applicable to the small pond community, but I entirely left it off here. And I'm realizing that just now is talking about waterway construction reviews. So waterway construction program and division is largely under the same set of regulations as we are in dam safety. And there has historically been kind of a gray area, I guess you could say, of who is responsible for reviewing and when waterways impacts. So that's changes of the course, current, and cross section. We're talking about changes in tractive force, temporary and permanent filling in the floodplain, and things like that. In consultation with the management of our Water and Science Administration, MDE, it was determined that if it's a dam, if it's primarily a dam project, and there happens to be waterway construction elements that need to be reviewed, that dam safety should be doing that review. What does that mean for folks out there? And we haven't fully started this yet, but that's very soon. We had to work out some, SOPs and all that, so we understood what our partners in the waterway construction division look for and how they review it, and make sure that we were coming close to that, if not mirroring it. So it means for dam projects, where it's primarily driven by a dam project, is we will be asking for some additional degrees of computations to demonstrate, that there are no changes in the course, current, or cross section of the waterway, or if they are, to quantify what they are so they can be wrapped into the permit. If you're used to getting a waterway construction permit, we'll be asking for the same things. It'll just be a change that, the same person in dam safety will be asking for two things, as opposed to you having to reach out and talk to two different people in two different divisions. Hopefully that actually, that consolidation of work and effort, hopefully, is an efficiency driver for everybody as well. So that's forthcoming, and we'll definitely release more communications on that. For folks who deal primarily in the small pond world, the good news for you is that there is really no change. COMAR, Maryland regulations, does not require a waterway construction review for small ponds, which are approved as a small pond. So again, that being said, that if you have a small pond and it's getting approved as a small pond, there is that exemption in COMAR. So this is a change that won't affect you, and it really hasn't been something that you've probably been concerned about in the past, because our partners in the waterway construction division, exercise that exemption as well. So we'll send out more information about that at the appropriate time, and try to add some more checklists about what kind of information we will be needing if that element comes into the project. So that's another new announcement. Hi, Martin. How can I help you? How can we help you? Martin, I see your hand raised, but I'm not sure if you're on mute or.
Old man, I forgot to turn on the speaker. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm going to make a suggestion based on what Bill was talking about. I've been mulling over whether I should say this or not. But we had a lot of problems the last several years, particularly with ESD things, with people giving us stuff that was not complete enough to do a review. Obviously, Bill was talking about the very same thing. So we made a list of what we had to have to actually do a review. Not the whole checklist, but if you don't do these 6 things, and then we've started sending out letters that say what you gave us was not complete enough for review. We're not going to count this as a review. This is not a review. There will be new additional comments when you give us a complete enough information for a review. We say that about 3 or 4 times in the letter.
Yeah.
And then when the developer calls to raise hell, we say, well, look at the letter. You really need to talk to your engineer, because we didn't count the first 2 times they sent it in as being reviews. They didn't give us enough stuff to actually do a review. And I will say that does tend to make developers have a few words with their engineers about that, but it helps us quite a bit.
Yeah, and I'll say that for folks who haven't seen it, the Appendix B that we're asking people to include with their JPA applications, or JPA packages, I'd say, does have a big picture checklist of, you know, to issue an approval, we need, or a permit, we need all of these things. But to get started, we need at least these things. And I think, you know, as you're mentioning this, Martin, you know, in developing that appendix, we really kind of viewed it as this is what we need if we're going to be issuing an approval. And this makes me think, you know, out loud here, is that if we're getting something, again, as we mentioned, we get these joint permit applications that may not need dam safety review and approval, maybe going through the district, or maybe something that's so small it doesn't need small pond approval anyways, but we have to take some action when we get that. So it just makes me write a note down to say, you know, put a little asterisk there. So, you know, if your project is coming in and you know, designed it so that these are, you know, meet those exemption thresholds, we don't even need all of the information we request. We only need a lot less. That can make things even more efficient. So I like that. You know, that's the name of the game, is information sharing, idea exchange, and, you know, improving everything. So I'm making a note of that. And I see Matt Ernst has raised his hand as well.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Good.
We'll probably jump back to the question about deficiencies and how dam safety would review dredging. Is that a maintenance or a potential deficiency?
So we have issued a policy, I think it's policy number 11, of things we consider to be maintenance activities. And it probably needs to be expanded, I'll say, given the feedback we've gotten when it comes to dredging. But our position is, you know, if you're restoring, let's talk about it in a stormwater pond kind of context first. If you're, you know, clearing out forebays and accumulated sediment and basically restoring the functionality of the stormwater pond to meet its, you know, original design extent, we consider that maintenance on our end, and that would not need approvals. You know, caveat being, there are other people out there who may need approvals, and I can't speak for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you're restoring the functionality of like a stormwater pond, that's one thing. If it's a bigger dam type structure, you know, certainly you might get into needing, you know, even up to Army Corps approvals for dredging. But that's another one where I would try to look at it through the lens of maintenance, unless there was, you know, this is where we've exercised some caution in the past, where if, depending on the type of dredging and how close you're going to get to the dam embankment, you know, there's a level of concern, right? So if you're doing dredging in the wet and you just get out there with a big long stick excavator, and, you know, the concern is that you might start digging up embankment material along with the sediment, then, you know, that's a different story. But otherwise,
Gotcha.
try to look at it through the lens of maintenance and not needing small pond or dam.
Okay, yeah, I'll double check that. I must have missed it in the policy memos, so appreciate that.
Yep. I have Another hand raised here. Name is listed as unknown. But if that's you, go ahead.
Hello, John. This is Charles Wallace, RK&K, not Charlie Wallace, sitting a couple of doors down from you. I want to touch back on what Mr. Cook was bringing up and put my designer hat on for a second on facilities that may have deficiencies that need to be corrected. The designer needs to be able to develop a sufficient scope and fee. And we can either give a sticker shock of full blown, it's got to go to John, get a full dam safety, or nickel and dime later on as reactionary to, well, we got this comment, it wasn't in our scope. How do we kind of balance that so that, the whole team, the owner, the designer, the regulator can have some consistency with being able to understand how far might we need to go at a scoping phase. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. Thanks, Charles. That's a good question. And not one that can be fully easily answered. I think, the notion of repairing known deficiencies, that idea of known, right, is important there. So I'm saying this out loud, and having sat, developing cost proposals as a consultant in the past, also realize I might be asking for too much. That's not realistic, but I think if you're coming in scoping a project, even just getting a cursory inspection of the facility to start with, is time well invested, right? Because hopefully you're capturing a lot of those, yeah, okay, we did see all those trees. Okay, yep, I poked my head in the spillway pipe and it looks really rusted out. We're thinking it's probably going to lead to X, Y, and Z. As we dig deeper into the idea of deficiencies, and we start getting into, I'm not 100% certain that the clay core cuts off an impervious layer, or we're not 100% certain about X, Y, Z type of things. I think that's when collectively some good engineering judgment is needed on everybody's part. And if it's a wet pond that's had a permanent pool and we're a little uncertain about the core material, but also we've never seen any issues of deficiencies in the past, and maybe we do have, maybe let's say there's triennial inspection reports for the stormwater feature. Well, is the fix worse than the illness itself, right? Is it worth digging up the entire embankment to extend the core 6 more inches to alleviate that question if we have no evidence of it being an issue in the past? And I think, I think it's appropriate to exercise judgment there. And that being said, as putting on my regulator hat is, if somebody wants to exercise their professional judgment, I appreciate that. To help me move it forward and get the buy-in, is I just need a well-reasoned argument. In a design report that explains, why, and just, kind of a outsized statement that says this is not an issue, so it's not an issue, doesn't do it. But if it's, we've looked back to the records, this has a permanent pool, we don't see any evidence of seepage now, there's been no reports of seepage in the past, there's no wetland type vegetation indicating wet, all of that kind of stuff, you build your case, then I think we can handle that type of known potential deficiency. So I don't know if I've maybe gone a little off topic on your answer, but hopefully that provides a little bit of context, at least on what I'm thinking. And I see Charlie's got his hand raised, so maybe the other Charles Wallace wants to chime in too.
My thought on that would be, if you've got a client, you may want to put in an alternative A or an alternative B, because the reality is, in some cases, there's a lot of uncertainty, being it what the what the final discretion is going to be as to who has to review it. And you might just want to point out to your client, there is this uncertainty and there's a lot of change going on. That alternate A is if it goes easy and we go through the local government, then this is what you can expect. And alternate B is if we're required to go through dam safety, then these are the additional costs and time that you might need to expect. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I think, and even, piggybacking on your comment there, Charlie, is it may not even be the difference between going, not going local or not going local, but, it's, let's say the spillway looks great, right? Let's say it's a concrete pipe spillway and concrete riser and it looks to be in great condition. But you're fixing some other issues, right? There's always that possibility that upon review, that spillway was designed for a 25-year storm, let's say, instead of a 100-year. Is it likely? Maybe not, but it's I don't want to tell people how to do their jobs, right? It's setting expectations and building that relationship with the clients to know that, there's known knowns and unknown unknowns and known unknowns. So, Bob, yeah.
Yeah, I know. You just sit here and keep thinking, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, since we have everybody, right? So I'm going to just get into the micro scale world, but micro scale BMP world for a second, because with climate change, increased rainfalls, the potential to leverage them more for flood control in the coming years. Clearly, there's going to be more ponding in them, more volume stored. And my question is, are we heading down a road where we're going to be doing dam breach analyses on microscale practices?
I think, well, the way we've kind of phrased it now, or put it nowadays, is we've got some thresholds on what would need a breach analysis and how intense it would be. So I think, I guess the question is, are we redefining what a microscale practice is and making it bigger, because we're expecting to hold more water, then that's the case, then maybe it would need a breach analysis. But if we're, if it's still a very small, 20,000 cubic foot facility or something like that, then, and that's what it is in the future too, then that doesn't seem to me that we would change the criteria of when it's needed or not. But that being said, as we look at the impacts of changing climate and building more resilient infrastructure, there's a lot of unanswered questions out there, I guess, on what that means in the big picture world of stormwater management. And I am by no means an expert on that.
Yeah, maybe the guy
topic,
that.
So it will, they're I don't know if you think of generationally, if we're in like the second or third generation of stormwater management, are we approaching generation 4? Perhaps.
Sure.
Does that change things? Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, well, I guess where I wanted to kind of lead that is, as we expand the complexity of the microscale practices, which there are numerous, and given the infrequent nature of big storms, it seems like we're going to really be steering back towards having flood control devices that predominantly are empty, but there for that safety factor, that insurance policy, rather than oversize these microbial retentions. That's where I think we're going, but I just want to see whether you kind of ended there yourself.
I'm not, I would tactfully try to not answer that one because it's just far enough outside of my area of expertise that I don't want to make any incorrect statements or assumptions. But if anybody else from MDE on the line has more informed opinions, then you're welcome to chime in. Or if it's something we're still studying and we're thinking we're going to have some answers on in a future horizon, you want to let people know that too, then that will be now's an opportunity.
Hey, John, this is Dee from Washington County. How are you?
Dee, good.
So I just want to bring out a point that has happened in our county, and I think that the consultant community really needs to look at this and certainly as we become more urbanized, is that a breach analysis really isn't totally based on sizing. You really need to look at what's downstream as to determine whether a breach analysis is needed, in my opinion. It could be a very small structure, but it depends on what's downstream.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And and some of our guidance that we've put out there is, it's easy to put things into compartments based on size.
Correct.
Right. And in many cases, you can feel pretty comfortable that, below a certain threshold, it's unlikely that there's a potential, consequences downstream. But that is, again, where, I think we all need to, use that professional engineering judgment that we have. And sure, maybe it is a really small micro scale feature, but it's on the top of a hill, and and there's a home immediately at the bottom of the hill. And it's just the unique mechanics of that situation. Maybe it is a hazard. So
correct, exactly my point. So I just wanted to bring that out.
Yep, I think we always need to just have that perspective too, and it's better to find that out, I think, and design it appropriately than to get our names in the news for when something bad happens. So
correct. Thanks, John.
Martin, you want to chime in? I'm not hearing you, Martin.
That's twice now. Sorry.
Third time, you're going to get kicked out.
Okay, that's fine. I'll hang up when I finish this one then. There are 7 minimum criteria in the stormwater management book, and they apply to all facilities, including all those that are less than 378. All right. One of them is that it's a Class A structure. So whatever it takes to prove that it's a Class A structure, if you're the reviewer there, just like I'm the reviewer here, you can tell them, prove it's a Class A structure. And I do that all the time, which means a microbial retention, not that I know this because I've looked at it hundreds of times, is 6 CFS. That's the max you can get. All right. When you do a breach on one of those things, but that 6 CFS has to go somewhere safely. Right. I mean, that's all it amounts to, but we make people do it all the time. They can't say, you can't make me do it. I point right to it. I said, prove it's a Class A structure, low hazard. And it has nothing to do with the height of it, except lower peak breach wave. All right.
Exactly.
Exactly. So don't let anybody try to play that game with you. Point them back to the 7 criteria in the state book and say, prove it.
Good point. Unknown has their hand raised first. That might be Charles Wallace again.
I'm assuming it is me, John, so I just unmuted. Let's look at it from the other perspective too. Look upstream. Will your project have hazard creep on an existing facility upstream that is not yours? State Road that I was reviewing as a peer reviewer situation, new state road going below an existing development pond upstream. Overtopping of a state road is one of the areas that you look at to determine hazard potential. Does the new state road change the hazard potential of the upstream facility? That's also important to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a really important one and complex. We've had those conversations internally quite a bit. As what's the responsibility of that downstream developer to make sure to address the fact that they've changed something on the upstream property, and that's a big esoteric and probably legal question that might have to save for another time. But it is a very good point to make sure we're thinking of that too.
I believe our recommendation on that was make sure your culvert can safely pass the breach storm.
Yeah, that's an easy way to do it. Yep, not adding to the problem. Come on.
So John, dam safety also has a policy memo number 4, which
Yeah.
actually tells you that you are exempt from doing the dam breach if you meet those minimum small pond criteria. So most of the ESDs hopefully will meet that criteria and will be exempt. Although that memo also towards the end of the memo still says the same thing which Dee and other people have said, that you have to see what's downstream, and sometimes this memo is not alone sufficient if there is a house right there. So, yep.
Exactly. Yep. I was thinking of that when I was, we're thinking of Dee's comment too. Scott Bass.
I have a comment that kind of puts a lot of these questions over to the developer gentleman earlier. I forget his name, but also the questions of which ponds are too small to care about, and increasing or review times. When do we have enough to review, etc. But this is where, and to Gunlon's last comment on, there is a too small to care. That's not the official name memo where we have this pond is very unlikely to be a hazard, but there is a bit at the end where it's basically put back on the professional engineer and saying, it's still on you. So if we have good criteria plus the stamp of a professional engineer that this isn't a hazard, that will, increase the likelihood that we, are comfortable with it. On a similar note, sometimes, and I'm not reviewing as many plans now as I used to, but we would get a lot of packages submitted with lots of QA/QC kind of very basic things not addressed, and the plans and engineering reports were not signed by a professional engineer. And technically, we shouldn't be reviewing those. So I think putting the burden on the professional engineer to do a thorough review, because put it under your stamp, it goes a long way to not bogging us down in basic review comments, or not having the stuff that we need to do a full review. So I just want to make sure that the professional engineer who's designing the ponds takes the responsibility, for the appropriate classification, making sure the plans are, up to snuff, for lack of a better term. So.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Scott. It's good point. James.
Hi, John. I'm not sure if this is the right forum to bring this up, but I do a lot of work in Baltimore County, and we were just informed maybe a couple weeks ago that EPS and the district will not be doing small pond reviews anymore, that it now has to go through dam safety. How does that work when you've gone through most of your review, getting close to the end, and now you have to go through dam safety? What is MDE's take on that?
Yeah, I'm reaching back to the memory banks, probably 6 months or so ago, when we were prepping to roll out the small pond approval guidance documents that really fully came into effect on January 1. And the conversations we had with some districts at that time was, what's the, lack of a better term, what's the grandfathering provisions, right? And I recall discussing with some of them is, if you're at the finish line of a review, I think it makes sense for the district to just finish the review. If you only just received the application and you haven't really even opened it up, then you should probably kick it to dam safety. If you weren't doing the review yourselves. And if you're somewhere in between it coming in 0 and at the finish line, then we can have some conversations. But that was, it didn't make a lot of sense for anybody to have to, get your spend the time in the review, get, to 90% done, perhaps just needing a few final cleanup on your drawings and some administrative stuff, and then have to start it all over with dam safety. And I did receive a inquiry to that nature this past week, perhaps pertaining to what your projects, because I forget which jurisdiction it was from, but I told them the exact same thing as we've just discussed here, is that, if this was one of those ones where you tried to get it done before that January 1 date and it just didn't happen, but, it was essentially the review was complete, then it makes sense to just finish it off at that point.
Hey, John, this is Dee again. I'll just kind of let you guys, I mean, you're aware of what we're doing here, but just for the other comment. So our district chose to find a consultant and go forward with a master services agreement for the new criteria effective January 1. However, we also have it set up with our current engineer to finalize plans that are in the queue, otherwise in the review process. As John said, they wouldn't go to the new service provider until, unless it's a new plan. He's going to stay on board reviewing the ones in the queue or in the review process until they're finished.
That's great to hear.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yep. Yeah. Across the board, it's, well, again, it kind of comes down to, how many pond applications that are out there versus the universe of people who are reviewing them. And hopefully we can get those right sized, so that, reviews are done in a timely manner, but also with some of these things, even just having this forum to exchange these ideas, hopefully that, gives some people some ideas perhaps, and we can make some good improvements here as well. Well, we've got about 15 minutes to the hour. Seems like the questions and the thoughts are starting to wear down. Perhaps everybody's ready to move on to the next thing. I'll see maybe if there's any last thoughts or questions. And if not, we can start wrapping this up. All right. We'll take that silence as meaning we're pretty much there. Thanks again for having this, for participating, everybody, or listening in. As we kind of saw, this is kind of a free-form conversation, information sharing type format, and we look forward to having them again. I believe I kind of penciled something in on my calendar in June, hopefully, before the schools let out or too many schools let out and, people start turning towards summer vacation, we can touch base again in this kind of way and have a chance to share information. Of course, if you have any questions specifically, like I mentioned before, you can always come to us. You can visit our website. We're trying to keep on updating it and already have some stuff in the queue for an FAQ that needs to be added. I'm trying to make that website a very repository of good information for folks. So hopefully that can be useful for you. And we recorded this presentation today. We've recorded some of our other past presentations. And if you were to Google or look on YouTube for the channel we have, that information can be found there. And if you're in need of any other kind of training and other resources, there are multiple providers. There's ASCE, there's United States Society on Dams. The Association of State Dam Safety Officials probably has the most comprehensive training and resources suite out there. So it's always something we recommend people checking out. Plus, there's good just resources for dam owners and things like that as well. So put that out there. And so I guess that's it. Got information here of my contact, so you can always feel free to reach out to me or any of our colleagues in dam safety. And with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.